Suleiman was born in Trabzon, on the Black Sea, the son of a sultan they called Selim the Grim. The empire he would inherit already ran on fear. His father had built it that way. At the palace school in Istanbul, the boy learned law, poetry, and war in the same breath, and worked a goldsmith's bench like every prince before him, because an Ottoman prince who couldn't build something with his hands couldn't be trusted to run an empire either. By 17, he governed Crimea. In Manisa, the post every heir passed through before the throne. He learned the difference between commanding an army and running a city, a lesson his father had never bothered to learn. When Selim the Grim died, Suleiman took the throne without a single rival to fight. His brothers were already dead, cleared away years before he needed to lift a finger. He was 25. Venetian ambassadors watched him take his seat and wrote home that the new sultan seemed mild, even gentle, a pause after his father's cruelty. They would spend the next 4 decades finding out how wrong that first impression was. His opening move gave no real warning either. He simply opened the prison gates his father had filled and let the merchants inside go home. Belgrade had turned back every Ottoman army for 70 years. Suleiman took it in his first campaign, still in his 20s, and turned next toward Rhodes, an island of Christian knights who had spent 2 centuries raiding Ottoman ships from behind its walls. It took 5 months and cost thousands of lives on both sides. But when the knights finally surrendered, Suleiman did something almost no conqueror of his century bothered to do. He let them walk away with their weapons and their banners, ships waiting to carry them into exile instead of the grave. Mercy, it turned out, could be its own kind of message. Hungary's young King Louis II refused to bow or pay tribute, so Suleiman marched. At Mohács, the 2 armies met for less than 2 hours, and by the end of it, Hungary's entire military nobility lay dead in a marsh. The king himself among them, drowned trying to escape on a horse that never made it across the water. He left no heir. His own brother-in-law, Ferdinand of Austria, claimed the empty throne for the Habsburgs before the body was even found. Suleiman answered by crowning a rival king of his own, and Hungary spent the next century and a half torn between 2 crowns that both called themselves legitimate. Vienna belonged to Ferdinand, but the real rival waiting behind it was his brother, Charles V, a Holy Roman Emperor who claimed the same kind of universal authority Suleiman claimed for himself. In 1529, Suleiman marched on Vienna to settle the question by force. Rain turned the roads to mud, his heaviest cannon fell weeks behind schedule, and a badly outnumbered garrison simply refused to break. Winter arrived before the walls did, and Suleiman turned back. The first time in his reign, the answer to a siege was no. He answered the humiliation the only way an emperor could. Not with another army, but with a crown. Commissioned from Venetian goldsmiths, 4 tiers high, built specifically to outshine the one Charles had worn at his own coronation. Vienna held the line. The crown made sure everyone still knew who was supposed to be greater. His own people rarely called him magnificent. That was a European habit. To the Ottomans, he was Kanuni, the Lawgiver, and it was the title he earned quietly, without a single battle. He took the empire's tangle of secular and religious law and folded it into one working system, worked out alongside his chief religious scholar, so the two never openly contradicted each other. He rewrote how land was taxed, how soldiers were paid, how far a local governor's cruelty could go before Istanbul stepped in. None of it made for dramatic history. Most of it outlived him by nearly 300 years, longer than almost anything he ever conquered. In 1533, Suleiman handed his navy to a corsair, a Barbary pirate named Barbarossa, who had spent his life raiding for himself and now raided for the empire instead. It didn't go smoothly right away. 2 years later, Charles V personally led a fleet that tore Tunis out of Barbarossa's hands, a defeat neither man could talk around. Barbarossa recovered. 3 years after that, at Preveza, his fleet shattered a combined Christian force and left the Ottomans ruling the Mediterranean for a generation. Suleiman even allied with Catholic France against their shared enemy, Charles V, a Muslim sultan and a Christian king united by nothing but a mutual rival. Barbarossa himself lived to enjoy that dominance until 1546, when he finally died in his own bed in Istanbul, and for generations afterward, Ottoman ships leaving the harbor turned to salute his tomb on the way out. To the east, Suleiman fought 3 separate wars against Persia's Safavid Shahs, wars with no clean finish line. In 1534, his army took Tabriz, then pushed on to Baghdad, the old capital of the Abbasid caliphs, returned to Sunni Ottoman hands and opening a direct route to the wealth moving through the Persian Gulf. 2 more campaigns came and went without settling anything, until 1555, when both empires finally signed a peace at Amasya and agreed, on paper at least, where one empire ended and the other began. Hurrem arrived in the imperial harem as a captured girl from Ukraine, one slave among many. What happened next had never happened before. Suleiman broke centuries of tradition and formally married her, the only concubine any sultan had ever made his wife. From then on, she was the only woman he ever wanted at his side for the rest of his life. She wrote letters to foreign kings. She funded hospitals and kitchens that fed the poor across the empire. And the more power she gathered, the more the men around the throne started watching her instead of him. Because in an empire built on sons proving themselves through their mother's influence, a woman that powerful was never going to be trusted for long. Mustafa, his eldest son, was exactly the kind of heir an empire hopes for. Capable, popular with the army, next in line without question. That was the problem. Rivals at court built a case against him, whispered it into Suleiman's ear long enough, and in 1553, inside his own military camp, Suleiman had his son strangled. A poem mourning Mustafa spread quietly across the empire afterward. Grief nobody dared say out loud in front of the man who'd ordered it. It didn't end there. Years later, 2 more of his sons, Selim and Bayezid, turned on each other for the same throne. Bayezid lost, ran to Persia for shelter, and was eventually handed back in chains to face the execution his own family had already perfected. While his sons destroyed each other, Suleiman's empire kept building. His chief architect, Sinan, raised hundreds of structures across Ottoman lands, and in 1557, his masterpiece opened in Istanbul, the Suleymaniye, a mosque wrapped around hospitals, schools, and kitchens that fed anyone who walked in hungry. Suleiman wrote poetry himself, publishing under the name Muhibi, and left behind nearly 3,000 poems by the time he was done. Historians still call this stretch of his reign the high point of Ottoman art and architecture. Proof that an empire can build its most lasting beauty in the exact years its family is quietly tearing itself apart. At 71, sick and worn down, Suleiman rode out on one final campaign, his 13th, toward a small Hungarian fortress called Szigetvar, held by a few thousand defenders against an army built to crush cities twice its size. He died quietly in his tent during the siege in September 1566, and his own Grand Vizier made a decision that would have made the old lawgiver proud. He told no one. For weeks, orders kept moving in the Sultan's name, and the army kept fighting, unaware the man they were fighting for was already gone. Szigetvar finally fell, days after the Sultan who'd come to take it. Suleiman ruled for 46 years, longer than any Ottoman Sultan before or since, over an empire that by the end stretched from Hungary to Persia to the shores of North Africa. The West remembered him as magnificent. His own people called him something plainer and, in the end, more accurate: the Lawgiver. Both names were true. Few rulers in history left behind quite so much order, or quite so much blood, most of it spilled by his own hand, inside his own family.